This video is the penultimate episode to this series, a companion video to the next and last video, part 6. These are meant to be viewed side by side to see an accurate and close comparison of the full dynamics of the leadership system in play. This video will show everything possible to be done with it at once in the vanilla game. The next video will show all modifiers relevant to the battle for just one faction though. This might sound a bit disappointing on the surface, however it is anything but. AOTR offers so many modifiers more per faction than vanilla that it's necessary to showcase only one of the factions. As for this video, all possible active modifier types will be shown from all factions possible, which includes all leaderships, buffs, spells, and debuffs that are possible to stack in the radius of a battle at one time, and to be active in a team game. In this video, the one exception is Theoden, since this demonstration is just for swordsmen and not for cavalry. This might sound overwhelming on the surface, but as we've explored in previous videos, the vanilla game just does not offer much variety in this way at all. Here's a good way to describe what I'm trying to get at. For example, in vanilla, while you could have in play a fortress with banners and a heroic statue, along with a hero with a leadership, all near each other, none of the leaderships would be stacking with each other, even though all would be active. So only one hero with leadership buffing out troops will be shown in this demonstration, not any of the structures just mentioned. These battles are to showcase only the active modifiers possible that can stack with each other at one time in the small radius of a battle. Which is to say, as I've said before in the series many times, only one leadership, one buff, one debuff, and X number of spells, up to a total of 5 spells possible. Showing this full dynamic in this way will draw attention quite powerfully to the massive difference found in AOTR, to be seen in part 6, the final video in this series, and help you to understand all the differences of the system between the two games at once. In these matchups, we'll see something a little different than what we've seen previously in the series. We've already seen what they're capable of previously before, so let's up the ante. This time we'll have 8 battalions of Gondor swordsmen, non-upgraded, against 4 battalions of fully upgraded Angmar troops. And we've seen in Part 4, Section A, the impact of debuffs, how effective the Tier 2 Angmar troops at taking out the same amount of Gondor troops when the Angmar soldiers are not upgraded. To balance the scales a little bit, the Gondor troops will have Aragorn's leadership, Glorfindel's Starlight, Dane's Mighty Rage, Mordor's Darkness, and the Elves' Elven Wood. However, the Angmar side will also have War Chant, Frozen Land, and Morgremir's Dark Glory spell. What's more, Morgrimir will also be using his normal debuff to debuff my troops. It will not take away Aragorn's leadership, but it will still do a substantial amount of debuffing. The purpose of this video is to see the full dynamics of the leadership system, minus Theoden's glorious charge, for just swordsman versus swordsman to keep it simple and clear, following up on and finishing everything that came before in this series. You'll see things happen very quickly for both sides, so let's give a brief rundown. I am playing the Men of the West and am allied with Mordor, Dwarves, and Elves. My opponent is Angmar, allied with just Goblins. What you'll see happen on my side is Elven Wood and Dane's Mighty Rage, followed up pretty quickly with Glorfindel's Starlight. I'll actually be in control of my Dwarf ally's hero King Dane and my Elf ally's hero Glorfindel, so as to be able to show their spells and use myself, but my Mordor ally will be independent as you would expect. Mordor's Darkness will cancel the Goblin's Darkness immediately. You'll see Rallying Call available, but it will not be used because it cannot be active and stacked with Elven Wood. Aragorn is buffing in the middle with his leadership. On the enemy's side, you'll quickly see them use War Chant, Frozen Land, and Morgremir's Dark Glory all at once in the very first second or two of the game. Remember that War Chant is active and stacks with Frozen Land, an unfortunate imbalance in the system. But my ally cancels out the Goblin's Darkness spell with his own to tip that balance just a tiny amount. It should also be noted, Morgamir will be debuffing my troops. I won't use the Sunlight spell as it would go against the purpose of this demonstration, which is to use only the modifier-related abilities, spells, buffs, etc. The Sunlight power is not one of them. So without further ado, let's see what happens. Only 30 Gondor troops of 120 remain. Had my Mordor ally not used darkness, we would have lost. Timing a weather power is crucial, especially up against a powerful foe like Angmar's Dark Dunedain, but so is knowing which weather power to use. If I had decided to overturn my ally's darkness with my sunlight power, the Angmar troops would have won the day. Angmar's troops are tough and were hard to stop, with even Dane's mighty rage debuffing them for a time. Morgamir's normal passive debuff was doing a number on the buff I got from the Darkness spell. The Darkness spell gives a 25% boost to damage and armor recall, and Morgamir debuffs the same amount. But even if I had as my ally Isengard instead of Mordor to use Freezing Rain to debuff them longer than Dane's debuff could last, the outcome would not have been much better. Only a handful more troops would have survived. With weather powers, you typically want to wait until your enemy casts his first so as to cancel it out. In many pro games, I've seen it to where no player uses weather buffs at all for fear of the enemy getting the upper hand, and now you can see just how much of an upper hand one can give, and why it can be so feared. Angmar would have had me without a weather power. Now, let's see the impact having the Witch King on the field can make, even in spite of all the buffs and spells arrayed against his smaller force. This time, I will have an Isengard ally instead of Mordor. He will use Freezing Rain to try to debuff the enemy, but the enemy's Witch King will be debuffing my troops and nullifying their leadership. We'll see both sides debuffing for the whole match, rather than just Dane's ability debuffing for a fraction of the time. So this will be a fascinating study. Again, Angmar will be fully upgraded. Let's see how it works. One unit totally tipped the balance. The Witch King is a powerful unit indeed to be able to contend with so much arrayed against him and win the day, at least in respect to the leadership system. Not only did he cancel out Aragorn's leadership, but his substantial debuff nullified much of the boost to the Gondor troops from the Elven Wood buff and the 2 spells. Even the sunlight power would not have availed much in this situation. Even Mordor's darkness instead of Isengard's freezing rain would not have helped enough. I lost a large percentage of my boosts when Aragorn's leadership was cancelled. The darkness spell would not have compensated for that, as a large percentage of that boost would have been taken away by the Witch King's debuff. He is a fearsome adversary indeed. As regards both sides debuffing, this is a tougher thing to see as there is a good deal of asymmetry involved in this matchup. You might think that because the good side has so much more going for it that it would win out even with the Witch King, but what ultimately tips the scales back on it is the removal of Aragorn's leadership. What's more though is that while Freezing Rain does nullify leadership modifiers, the enemy doesn't have any leadership modifiers to remove in this matchup, and Freezing Rain cannot cancel out the buff, spell, or debuff modifiers, only greatly decrease their damage and armor boosts. As great as Freezing Rain's decrease of those is though, the Witch King's is better, 33% versus 25% with Freezing Rain. Naturally, in this matchup the battle would not be over, but that's not the point in this demonstration. It's only to show clearly how only the modifiers work apart from heroes contributing physically to the combat as well. It's tricky to understand in the heat of a battle, so I hope that this last demonstration helps to push away any remaining doubts, now that you've seen all modifiers at the same time. So why explore so much about the severely limited variety of stackable spells and the intricacies of how spells, leadership, buffs, and debuffs work and cancel each other, etc.? Simple. It's to introduce the sharp contrast to AOTR's massive overhaul to and simplification of this whole system. AOTR takes a far more dynamic approach to their usage, not limiting each faction to one damage armor spell as in vanilla, nor even limiting the sources of them to just heroes and spellbook powers, but including non-heroic and heroic units as sources of them, and heroic units being able to be affected by them. As if that were not enough, even structure damage and armor can be boosted by some units, leaderships, buffs, and spells in AOTR, and stack for the ultimate turtle player. So why can't we stack heroes' leadership to get the same or better results on a permanent basis, rather than relying upon short-lived spells, buffs, debuffs, and spellbook powers here in The Rise of the Witch King? Simple. It's a flawed design in the code. Leaderships will turn on for one hero for a few seconds, then turn off, then a second hero's leadership will turn on for a few seconds, turn off, and so on. Furthermore, buffs will simply replace one another, same with debuffs. It's why all leadership values are the same as each other, and why all buff values are the same as each other, and why bigger debuffs like the Witch King's override smaller debuffs instead of stacking, as you would expect two modifiers with different values to do. So in the vast majority of games, players are handicapped in vanilla to one leadership and one buff to boost damage and armor, and maybe get one spell, depending on the faction played. Isengard having no spells, of course. Hoping for more than that, given the severe limitations of spell combos, is almost pointless given how it would take considerable coordination between team players to pull off. Needless to say, the handicaps imposed on leaderships, buffs, and debuffs is unfortunate. Versatility suffers, and the approach to factions to differentiate them from each other in terms of the modifier system feels repetitive and uninspired. And it limits teamwork. So this unfortunate design puts players into a bottleneck for strategic options and limits creativity and dynamics of play. It lacks depth. While Vanilla's modifier system isn't this way because of a bug, it certainly performs like it is because of a bug, what with leaderships flickering and buffs replacing one another. Such severe limitations for the sake of simplicity is not a good trade-off when compared to the possibilities like we're about to see in the Age of the Ring mod. It makes each faction feel like you've seen it before and keeps them from being thematically unique. As for the aforementioned limitations in the code, all it would have taken was but a changing of only a single line of code for each modifier type to free up the whole system. Doing something so simple, players would have been able to combine many leaderships, buffs, and debuffs in either single player or in team games. For all they were set on making a modifier system of simplicity, the irony is that Vanilla's developers let these lines of code be changeable at all, thus letting modifiers stack. The limitations are not hard-coded in. So the very code itself of the modifier system can allow for versatility, creativity, and better teamwork, all by changing just those few lines in the code. The Vanilla's developers left all this and the incredible potential it holds on the cutting room floor is difficult to understand. Luckily, Age of the Rings developers saw this potential and fixed the flawed design of the code. The next part in this series will finally begin to cover in detail the AOTR overhaul of the whole system.